My story began at that unforgettable party where I met Max. This moment became the starting point in my life. Fate intervened in our meeting. Max was a great gentleman. His charm and smile drew attention to me like a magnet. We spent this evening like magic, and time seemed to stand still, allowing us to enjoy the moment. My impressions of him were amazing. Max was attentive, caring, and funny. He was able to entertain and keep up a conversation, and each of our meetings was like a new episode of a romantic story. The following days and weeks became happy days of initial attraction for us. Over time, our relationship has become deeper and more serious. Everything seemed too good to be true. A few years later, our relationship developed into a real and indescribable love. So without the slightest doubt, it's time for the wedding. We decided that our union should be forever, and our wedding was a joyful and bright event filled with happiness and hope. My heart was beating in time with every note of the music that day, and I was burning with the desire to build our future together. On this day, everything around us seemed transformed. The sun shone brighter, the flowers seemed more colorful, and the moment when Max took my hand to lead me to the altar was like a fairy tale. We made vows of love and loyalty, and I believed that our story would be a fairy tale that would never end. Everything seemed perfect, but I couldn't help but notice that after that wedding, Max began to change. At first, it was small misunderstandings that seemed insignificant. We discussed how we see our future, and sometimes our opinions differed. But I thought it was normal, because in any relationship there are small differences, right? But gradually other changes began. Max became more and more restrained and impenetrable. Instead of talking, as before, he withdrew into himself. We spent nights in silence, and I understood that he was hiding something important. Our misunderstandings became deeper and deeper, and my attempts to find out what was going on did not bring results. Max brushed off the conversations as if he didn't want to share his feelings with me. In those moments, I felt lonely and helpless. Our relationship, which seemed so strong and close, began to disintegrate. But I couldn't accept that our happiness was disappearing. But the more I tried, the more Max became remote. This uncertainty and split in our relationship has become a part of my daily life. Desperate to understand what was going on, I decided to turn to his family and friends. They were closer to him. Maybe they knew something that he was hiding from me. But their answers were cryptic and disappointing. They said that Max was just like that at times, and that it was normal in a marriage. I couldn't accept that answer. Max was the man I loved, and I refused to believe that our relationship could end this way. But the more I learned, the more it seemed to me that something sinister lurked inside Max. We discussed the future, and Max always said what I wanted to hear, but deep inside I had a feeling that he was hiding his true intentions. Masking problems has become our daily reality. Max was a master of persuasion and manipulation, able to mask the true essence of what was happening. He was telling me what I wanted to hear, convincing me that everything was fine, but something in my soul screamed that it wasn't. It was hard to believe that a man I loved so deeply could hide something so important from me. This masking of problems corroded our relationship. But one day, everything turned out in a completely unexpected way. We were standing in our bedroom, and suddenly Max said something I couldn't even imagine. From his lips came the words, "Get out of my house." This phrase was uttered with such incredible cold-blooded confidence that I was seized with panic and despair. I was left standing in front of the closed door, stunned, not understanding what had happened. "Max, what are you saying? This is our home, our relationship." My words trembled, but Max just looked at me with an indifferent expression in his eyes. "I'm sick of it, Kate. Get out." He repeated the phrase as if it was the last thing he wanted to say. This dramatic moment turned out to be the point of no return when Max kicked me out of our house. This cold confidence in his voice tore the ground from under my feet. In an instant, everything we had built collapsed, and I was left alone. My fingers were knocking on the closed door. I couldn't believe that Max, whom I loved so deeply, could kick me out of our own home. "Why, Max?" I whispered, hoping for some kind of answer. But his face remained indifferent, as if he was a person I no longer knew. "It's not working, Kate," he said, as if justifying his actions. "We'd better go our separate ways." I couldn't understand what had happened and why he did it. After leaving home, I turned to friends to find support. My loved ones were stunned by what happened, and they immediately started asking questions. "What's wrong, Kate?" my friend Sarah asked. I sighed and tried to explain the situation to her. "Max kicked me out of the house, and I do not know why. He became somehow mysterious." Sarah exchanged glances with other friends, and I realized that they started discussing it behind my back. "Kate, surely you have an idea what could have caused this behavior?" her husband, Michael, asked. I honestly admitted that I can't find any obvious reason, but my friends didn't give up. Their attention to detail was amazing. "Maybe it's stress at work. Maybe he's hiding something serious," but none of the ideas seemed convincing. While my friends and I were trying to solve the mystery of Max's behavior, memories of happiness in our relationship flashed through my head. The days when we first started dating seemed so far away. We laughed, talked, and spent days filled with joy and hope. All these moments when Max was caring and attentive became a bright memory for me, which now seemed lost. I remembered how he gave me flowers, how we walked in the park, how he shared his dreams and plans for the future. But now it all seemed like a distant dream. They reminded me that our history was not always so difficult and incomprehensible, that once we had real happiness. And I kept hoping that I would find answers and bring back this bright side of our love, as if fate itself decided to reveal Max's dark secret. That day, while I was tidying up our things, my fingers came across something cold and hard hidden in the back corner of a drawer in his room. I took out a small envelope. Its edges were noticeably worn out by time. My heart started beating faster when I opened it. There were photos hidden inside the envelope, and they showed Max and a woman I couldn't recognize at first glance. My hand was shaking as I looked at these photos. They showed Max in hugs and kisses with this woman. My heart was bleeding from the pain, and tears began to pour into my eyes. I couldn't believe my eyes. My world collapsed, and Max's betrayal turned out to be impossible for me to contain. On the one hand, there was me, Kate, a woman who always believed in her love for Max. On the other, photos, a terrible truth that could not be ignored. I wanted to deny the fact of infidelity, hoping that it was some kind of terrible nightmare. But the photos were too real, too convincing to be written off as fantasy. I couldn't believe that Max, the man I loved so deeply, could betray me. Every day the mystery of Max's behavior became more and more confusing, but at the same time I began to get hints from his friends about what was behind that mystery. One day at one of the parties where Max's friends gathered, one of them, Daniel, came up to me and said in a whisper, "Kate, you need to know the truth. That woman in the photos, this is Max's old friend. Her name is Lisa." My heart stopped. Lisa was a name I rarely heard, but every time it was pronounced, there was a special note in Max's voice. Max's friends told me a story that he skillfully hid from me. Lisa was a woman from his past who had once been his lover, but their relationship ended painfully and destructively. She left his life, but found herself back in it, and their old feelings flared up with renewed vigor. Now I understood that the photos were proof not only of betrayal, but also of Max's return to his past. When I decided to find some hints about his past from his old friends, one of them, Michael, told me the truth, which Max stubbornly denied. Michael said that all of Max's friends had long known about his abusive behavior in the past. "Kate, we're sorry you had to deal with this," he said. "We always knew that Max is not what he seems. He was an abuser in a past relationship, and this was the reason for his unpredictable behavior." My eyes filled with tears and my heart was torn apart. I couldn't believe that a person I loved and trusted so deeply could become an abuser. I read his diary, and with each new detail that I learned about Max's past, my heart broke more and more. He described his mental illnesses, fears, and panic attacks. He could not control his emotions and reactions, and this led to abusive behavior. One of the entries became particularly important. In it, Max confessed his true feelings. "I married her trying to forget Lisa, my ex-girlfriend. I was afraid of losing Lisa and couldn't accept our separation. She was my first true love, and I couldn't forget her." This confession revealed Max's fear of losing his ex-girlfriend and his inability to cope with this loss. He married me hoping that a new love would erase his old wounds, but his mental illnesses and demons were stronger than his desire to start a new life. My disappointment was deep, and I understood that I could not stay in a relationship where I was used and betrayed. Max was no longer the person I was in love with, and although I understood his struggle with the disease, it did not justify his actions and betrayal. When Max kicked me out of our house, I had no choice but to go to my parents. He took my phone away from me, and I was left without communication and for a while. So, despite my fatigue and emotional state, I had to walk. I wanted to walk this path myself, as a symbol of my independence and determination. Every step was an act of liberation. At some point, I stopped to rest under the roof of a small gas station. There, I met an old man who treated himself to hot coffee from a thermos. His words were like consolation and support at that moment. A few more hours passed when I finally saw my parents' house on the horizon. Wet and cold, I went to their door and knocked. My mother opened the door and hugged me tightly, as if I had returned from a long journey. As the days passed in my parents' house, I began to remember those rare moments of happiness and joy that Max and I shared. These memories were like bright moments, and I wanted to keep them in my memory. I realized that red flags and warnings should not be ignored, even if falling in love muddies the mind. Over time, I learned more about Max's life before we met. It turned out that his relationship with Lisa was far from ideal. Lisa was a woman of strong will and independent, but she could not tolerate Max's aggressive behavior. They constantly quarreled, and this jeopardized their relationship. Max has always been a manipulator, and he used his charms to convince Lisa to marry him. But their marriage turned out to be unhappy and full of conflicts. Lisa left, and Max was left alone. I met a man who turned out to be a real support in my life. He was a rich and successful man, but more importantly, he was an understanding and caring partner. He helped me recover from abusive relationships and supported me in my aspirations for self-realization. I knew my life wouldn't be the same anymore. I became stronger and more confident in myself, and most importantly, I found a person who appreciated me and supported me in everything. That's how the story ended, which began with the party where I first met Max. I always believed that my marriage to David was as solid and reliable as a well-built house standing on a foundation of stone. We met back in college, and ever since then, we had been inseparable, or so it seemed. However, all illusions about our strong union were shattered one fateful day when everything changed. It was a quiet Sunday morning, and we were sitting at the breakfast table. David, as usual, appeared calm and self-assured. We were discussing future plans, dreaming about our own home and children. But on that day, he suddenly broached a topic that sent a chill down my spine. He leaned across the table, his gaze intense as he said, "Cindy, I need to talk to you about something important." His tone was different, a subtle shift that made my heart race with unease. I looked into his eyes, searching for clues, but there was something distant, almost calculating in his expression. My instincts screamed at me that this conversation would change everything. "What is it, David?" I replied, trying to sound calm despite the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. He cleared his throat and continued, "I've been dealing with some financial troubles, and I didn't want to worry you. But now, I think it's time we address it together." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Financial troubles? We had always been open about our finances, or so I thought. We shared our goals, budgets, and decisions, or at least that's what I believed. I leaned in, waiting for him to reveal the extent of the problem. David hesitated before dropping the bombshell. "Cindy, I had to borrow $210,000, and I used our joint account for it." My heart stopped. $210,000 was an enormous amount of money, and we hadn't discussed any significant expenses recently. Panic surged through me as questions swirled in my mind. What could possibly require such a massive loan without my knowledge? "I had no other option, Cindy," David continued, his voice shaky. "It's a short-term thing, and I promise I'll pay it back as soon as possible." The room felt like it was closing in on me. "Short-term?" I stammered. "David, you should have talked to me about this before taking such a drastic step. We're a team, and we make decisions together." He reached for my hand, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I know, and I'm sorry. I didn't want to burden you with this. But trust me, once this is over, everything will be back to normal." Normal. That word echoed in my mind as the weight of the situation sank in. This was the beginning of a storm that would rock the very foundation of our marriage. David's revelation about the $210,000 loan hung heavily in the air between us, casting a shadow over our relationship. Days turned into weeks, and I watched as David's behavior started to change. He became distant, preoccupied with matters he wouldn't discuss. It was as if he had become a different person. One evening, as I sat in the dimly lit living room, trying to make sense of our situation, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a young man standing there. He had a friendly smile and warm brown eyes, and his name was Ken, my brother's friend from college. Ken had always been a kind and reliable person, and I was grateful to see a familiar face during such a turbulent time. "Hey, Cindy," Ken said, his voice filled with concern. "I heard about what's been happening. How are you holding up?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I welcomed him inside. "Not well, Ken. Everything is falling apart, and I don't know what to do." Ken listened attentively as I poured out my worries about David's sudden transformation and the massive loan he had taken without my knowledge. He nodded sympathetically and then shared his own suspicions. "Cindy, I hate to say this, but I think David may be hiding something even more significant from you," Ken said hesitantly. I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" Ken explained that he had accidentally come across some documents while visiting my brother's office. These documents hinted at David's involvement in a series of questionable financial decisions. It appeared that David had been secretly managing our family's finances and investments, taking on significant risks without my knowledge or consent. My heart sank as I absorbed this shocking revelation. David had always been the more financially savvy one in our marriage, but I trusted him implicitly. The idea that he had been keeping such important matters hidden from me was both infuriating and heartbreaking. Ken continued, "I think you need to take a closer look at these documents, Cindy. you might discover the full extent of what's been happening. With Ken's help, I delved into the paperwork he had brought, uncovering a web of deceit and financial manipulation that left me stunned. David had taken out loans against our assets, invested in high-risk ventures, and even purchased a lavish apartment for an exorbitant price of $350,000, all without my knowledge. The weight of his betrayal was crushing. As I confronted David with this newfound information, his demeanor shifted from guilt to anger. Our once loving relationship had become a battleground, and I was determined to uncover the truth behind his actions. The revelations about David's financial double life were just the beginning of a tumultuous journey that would lead to a courtroom showdown. The discovery of David's hidden financial dealings had transformed our marriage into a turbulent sea of uncertainty. Our arguments became more frequent, our trust eroded, and it seemed as though every day brought new revelations of his betrayal. But the worst was yet to come. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table amidst a tense silence, David slid a stack of documents across to me. I looked at him questioningly, unsure of what he was up to now. He wore a smug expression, as if he held all the cards. "What's this?" I asked, eyeing the papers suspiciously. David leaned in, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Cindy, I've been thinking about our future, and I believe it's time we make an investment together. I found a fantastic opportunity to buy a luxury apartment, and I've already drawn up the paperwork. I just need your signature to seal the deal." I scanned the documents, and my heart sank as I saw the hefty price tag of $350,000. This was the same apartment he had purchased without my knowledge, the one that had set off alarms in my mind. The sense of déjà vu was overwhelming. "David, we can't afford this," I replied, my voice trembling with frustration. "We're drowning in debt because of your secret financial dealings. I won't sign this." But David was relentless. He launched into a rehearsed spiel about how this investment would secure our financial future, how we'd eventually make a profit, and how he had already arranged for the financing. As he spoke, he slid a document in front of me, disguised among the others. I glanced at it briefly, thinking it was part of the same stack. Unbeknownst to me, it was a cunningly crafted agreement, worded in a way that made it appear innocuous. Without fully comprehending its contents, I signed it, hoping that appeasing him would somehow bring our shattered marriage back from the brink. David's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to triumph as he pocketed the signed agreement. It was only later, after Ken helped me review the documents more carefully, that we realized the extent of David's deceit. That seemingly innocuous paper I had signed was, in fact, a binding contract for the purchase of the extravagant apartment, and it held me liable for the entire $350,000. David had manipulated me into taking on a crushing debt, all while knowing that I worked at Walmart and would never be able to cover such a massive financial burden. The revelation left me feeling devastated and trapped. My trust in David had been shattered completely, and I had no idea how to escape the financial quicksand he had pulled me into. With a heavy heart, I knew I had to take action. But little did I know that David's betrayal would soon escalate to a point of no return, tearing our marriage apart at its seams. The weight of my signature on that deceitful document began to crush me. I felt like a pawn in David's elaborate game, a game where he held all the cards and manipulated me at every turn. Our home, our dreams, and my financial stability were hanging by a thread, all because I had unknowingly signed away our future. As the days passed, David's behavior grew even more erratic. He withdrew further into his own world, avoiding any discussions about the mounting debt or his secretive financial schemes. He seemed to relish the power he held over me, exploiting my vulnerability at every opportunity. One evening, Ken visited me, concern etched across his face. He had been researching the legal aspects of our predicament and had uncovered a troubling fact. David had not only deceived me into signing that contract, but had also been funneling money out of our joint accounts to fund his extravagant lifestyle and finance his other investments. "Cindy, we need to act fast," Ken said urgently. "David's actions could ruin you financially if we don't stop him." With Ken's support, I decided to seek legal counsel. I approached a lawyer to discuss my options and understand the implications of the contract I had unwittingly signed. The lawyer's words were grim. I was legally bound to fulfill the terms of the agreement, and failure to do so could lead to dire consequences, including the loss of our home and assets. As I sat in that lawyer's office, a sense of desperation washed over me. I knew I couldn't shoulder this burden alone, but my pleas for David to take responsibility fell on deaf ears. He had become a stranger, driven by greed and deceit, and he seemed determined to see me suffer the consequences of his actions. The next step was clear. I had to take legal action to protect myself and salvage what was left of our shattered lives. With Ken's unwavering support, I filed a lawsuit against David, accusing him of financial deception and fraud. It was a painful decision, but it was the only way to break free from his web of lies and manipulation. As the lawsuit progressed, I faced not only the legal battle, but also the emotional turmoil of severing ties with the man I had once loved. David's reaction to the lawsuit was explosive, filled with anger and threats. He begged me to drop the case, promising to make amends and pay off the debts he had accrued. But I had learned the hard way that David's promises were empty, his remorse shallow. The damage had been done, and I was determined to see justice served, even if it meant taking him to court. As the legal battle intensified, it became clear that the betrayal ran deeper than I could have ever imagined, and the true extent of David's deceit was yet to be revealed. The legal battle with David was taking a toll on me emotionally and financially. I found myself consumed by the stress of the lawsuit, trying to juggle work at Walmart and court appearances while grappling with the deep sense of betrayal that had tainted my marriage. As the court date loomed closer, David's behavior became increasingly erratic. He refused to cooperate with the legal process, often missing court hearings and ignoring subpoenas. It was as if he was trying to prolong the agony, to keep me ensnared in his web of deception. One day, as I arrived home from work, I found a note on the kitchen table. It was from David, and it read, "Cindy, I can't handle the pressure of the lawsuit anymore. I need some time to think and clear my head. Don't try to contact me. I'll be back when I'm ready." I was stunned. David had vanished, leaving me to face the legal battle alone. He had abandoned our home, our marriage, and his responsibilities, disappearing without a trace. Days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of David. He had effectively cut ties with me and seemingly vanished from our lives. My emotions were in turmoil, torn between the anger and hurt caused by his betrayal and the lingering love I had once felt for him. Ken continued to be my pillar of support during this trying time. He helped me navigate the legal proceedings, even as we struggled to locate David and serve him with court documents. It became apparent that David was evading the consequences of his actions, choosing to hide rather than face the truth. The financial burden was crushing, and I was drowning in debt. My once stable life had unraveled before my eyes, and I was left to pick up the pieces. The emotional pain ran deep, and the betrayal I had endured haunted my every thought. Despite David's disappearance, the lawsuit continued, and it was evident that I had to see it through to the end. I had to fight not only for justice, but also for my own sense of self-worth and dignity. As the court proceedings continued, the evidence against David mounted, revealing the extent of his deception. It was during this time that I received an unexpected message from David. He begged for forgiveness, claiming that he had made a terrible mistake and wanted to make amends. He promised to return and face the consequences of his actions. But could I trust his words, or was this just another ploy in his elaborate game of deception? Only time would tell as the courtroom drama reached its climax. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and determination. David had reappeared as he had promised, but his presence only fueled the emotional turmoil that had enveloped me since the beginning of this ordeal. As the legal proceedings commenced, the evidence against David was presented methodically. His financial deceptions, the secret loans, and the fraudulent purchase of the extravagant apartment were all laid bare for the court to see. My lawyer, with Ken's support, painted a vivid picture of the web of deceit David had woven. David, on the other hand, seemed like a broken man. His once confident demeanor had crumbled under the weight of his actions and the mounting evidence against him. He pleaded for forgiveness, admitting that he had made grave mistakes and had let greed cloud his judgment. The courtroom drama intensified as we reached the climax of the trial. The judge, a stern figure who had been overseeing the proceedings, listened attentively to both sides. It was clear that the case had far-reaching implications not only for David and me, but for the principles of trust and honesty within a marriage. As the judge prepared to deliver the verdict, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Would justice be served? Would David be held accountable for his actions, or would he manage to evade the consequences once more? Finally, the judge spoke. Based on the evidence presented and the gravity of the financial deceptions committed, I find the defendant, David, guilty of fraud and breach of trust. The court orders him to serve a prison sentence of 7 years and to pay restitution in the amount of $250,000 to the plaintiff, Cindy. David's face contorted with shock as the reality of his actions and their consequences set in. He was handcuffed and led away, his pleas for leniency falling on deaf ears. In that moment, justice had been served, and I had finally achieved a sense of closure. David's betrayal had come at an enormous cost, but I had stood my ground and fought for what was right. The legal battle had been grueling, but I had emerged stronger, having reclaimed my sense of self-worth and dignity. The road to recovery was long and challenging, but I was determined to rebuild my life, free from the shadows of David's deceit. Ken continued to be a steadfast friend, supporting me every step of the way. The scars of the past would always be a part of me, but I had learned the importance of trust, resilience, and the unwavering power of self-determination. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, I knew that I had taken a decisive step towards healing and rebuilding my life. David's betrayal would forever be a painful chapter in my past, but it had also been a catalyst for my personal growth and newfound strength. In the aftermath of that devastating plane crash that claimed the lives of my entire family, my world had crumbled into an abyss of grief. Every moment felt like a struggle against an invisible force that sought to drag me into an endless darkness. It was in those darkest hours that Eric, my husband, became my anchor, or so I thought. His arms held me as I wept, his soothing words trying to mend the shattered pieces of my heart. He played the role of the doting husband, the supportive partner who stood by me in my time of need. And yet, as his fingers brushed away my tears, I couldn't shake off the nagging suspicion that there was something more beneath the surface, a motive hidden behind those comforting eyes. The day the lawyer arrived with the news of my inheritance, my emotions swung from disbelief to relief. $2 million, an unexpected lifeline that promised financial stability amidst the wreckage of my personal life. Eric's reaction seemed genuine. His smile was warm, his congratulations sincere. but the doubt remained, an insidious whisper that grew louder with each passing day. It was in the hushed moments of solitude that I replayed our interactions, his expressions, and his words. How his demeanor shifted imperceptibly when the topic of money arose, how his touch seemed to linger a tad too long when he thought I wasn't paying attention. It was as if a mask had slipped, revealing the true contours of his desires. In my heart, I knew that Eric's supposed support was a facade, a thin veneer covering a much darker truth. The inheritance wasn't just a stroke of luck to him. It was an opportunity to seize control, to mold circumstances in his favor. As I grieved for the family I had lost, I found myself mourning the relationship I thought I had. Unbeknownst to him, my grief had sharpened my senses. I could see through his act, his feigned sympathy, his carefully crafted words. I wasn't just dealing with the loss of my loved ones. I was battling the realization that the person I had entrusted my heart to was someone with a heart consumed by greed. And so, as I navigated the complexities of my inheritance, I braced myself for a storm I knew was coming. A storm that bore his name, Eric. As weeks turned into months, Eric's behavior began to shift in ways that set off alarm bells within me. At first, it was the subtle signs, a furtive glance at his phone screen, a sudden change in demeanor when I entered the room while he was online. I brushed them off, attributing them to the stress we were both under due to the recent upheaval in our lives. But as time wore on, the signs grew harder to ignore. Late nights spent hunched over his computer, his eyes glued to the screen, his fingers clicking away with a feverish intensity. I would tiptoe into the room, finding him ensnared in the glow of the monitor, lost in a world of virtual dice rolls and slot machines. And then there were the distant conversations he had on the phone, hushed tones that left me feeling like an outsider in my own home. When I confronted him, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and concern, his initial reaction was one of defensiveness. He tried to brush off my worries, insisting that he was merely engaging in a harmless pastime to distract himself from the pain. But the facade cracked when I delved deeper, my words a mirror that reflected the truth he tried so hard to hide. "Eric, this isn't healthy," I told him one evening, my voice a mix of frustration and worry. "You're using this as an escape, and it's taking a toll on us. You're spending money we don't have to spare." He looked at me, his eyes momentarily devoid of the spark that had once drawn me to him. "It's not a big deal," he retorted, his tone sharper than he intended. "I'll stop when things settle down." But things didn't settle down. In fact, they escalated. It wasn't just his paycheck he was throwing into the void of his addiction. It was my inheritance. The money that had been meant to provide a safety net, a chance for us to rebuild our lives, was being poured into a virtual black hole. And with each passing day, the financial security that inheritance had promised seemed to slip further away. I pleaded with him, begged him to seek help, to understand the gravity of his actions. But his addiction had wrapped its tentacles around him, suffocating reason and drowning empathy. It was as if he had forgotten about our shared dreams, the plans we had made before the tragedy struck. All that mattered now were the fleeting highs of his online escapades, the thrill of the next gamble. In the depths of the night, as I lay awake beside him, I couldn't help but wonder if this was what he had wanted all along. The inheritance, the facade of support, it had all been a means to an end, a way to fuel his obsession without facing the consequences. And as the days turned into weeks, I realized that my suspicions weren't unfounded. Eric wasn't just battling a gambling addiction. He was waging a war against our marriage, against the trust that had once bound us together. As Eric's gambling addiction tightened its grip on him, I noticed a new dimension to his behavior, a darker, more manipulative edge that sent shivers down my spine. It began subtly, with guilt trips and veiled threats that left me feeling like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. One evening, after an argument over the mounting bills and his excessive spending, Eric's tone shifted. His eyes, once warm, now held a cold glint as he looked at me. "You know, Nancy," he said, his voice dripping with venom, "if things keep going this way, I'll have no choice but to consider my options." I stared at him in disbelief, the weight of his words sinking in. He was using our children as leverage, implying that he would fight for custody if I didn't comply with his demands. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, casting a shadow over everything we had built together. The manipulation didn't stop there. Eric began to insinuate that I was being reckless with the inheritance, that I was squandering the money on frivolous things. He planted seeds of doubt in my mind, making me question my own decisions and second-guess my judgment. And as much as I tried to resist his tactics, a seed of fear took root within me. The fear of losing my children, the fear of being painted as an unfit mother. But I wasn't blind to his gains. Beneath the veneer of concern, I saw his true intentions. He wanted control over the inheritance, control over my decisions, control over our lives. And he was willing to use any means necessary to achieve it. One evening, I confronted him about his threats, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Eric, we're supposed to be a team," I said, my words tinged with the pain of betrayal. "We're supposed to support each other, especially after everything we've been through." His response was chilling, a calm facade masking a storm of manipulation. "Of course, Nancy," he replied, his voice laced with a sickening sweetness. "But we have to think about what's best for the children. I'm just trying to protect them." The following days were a battle within myself, a battle between the love I had once felt for him and the growing realization that he was using our children as pawns in his twisted game. It was a battle between my desire to preserve our family and the need to protect my children from his toxicity. And so, as I navigated this treacherous terrain, I knew that the storm was far from over. Eric's desperation had turned him into a manipulative puppet master, pulling the strings in an attempt to gain control over my inheritance, and in turn, my life. But I was determined not to let him succeed, to stand strong against his emotional onslaught and protect the future I had fought so hard to secure. The descent into a legal battle was a painful chapter I had never anticipated. As Eric's manipulation tactics grew bolder, it became clear that he wasn't going to back down without a fight. The man I had once shared my dreams and fears with had become a stranger who was willing to tear down everything we had built, all for the sake of his insatiable greed. The courtroom became the battleground for our crumbling marriage. Eric's lawyer painted him as a victim of circumstance, someone who had stood by my side through the darkest times. His arguments twisted the truth, weaving a narrative of love and sacrifice that had never truly existed. I watched as he shed crocodile tears, his words laced with false emotion, his eyes never quite meeting mine. As the proceedings unfolded, the facade began to crumble. Witnesses testified to his volatile behavior, his reckless spending, and his addiction that had driven a wedge between us. The man who had once promised to protect and cherish me had become someone unrecognizable, a man consumed by his own desires, willing to destroy everything in his path to get what he wanted. But the most heartbreaking moment came when he took the stand, his voice trembling as he recounted the memories he claimed to have shared with my family. He spoke of picnics, laughter, and cherished moments that had never happened. He painted a picture of a close-knit family dynamic that had never existed, exploiting the tragedy of my loss to garner sympathy from the court. As his lawyer argued that Eric deserved a portion of the inheritance due to his supposed emotional connection to my family, I felt a mixture of anger and betrayal. How dare he use the memory of my loved ones to justify his greed? How dare he twist the truth to suit his narrative? Throughout the trial, my lawyer presented evidence of his addiction, his reckless behavior, and the emotional manipulation he had subjected me to. The courtroom became a battleground of truths and lies, a place where the facade he had constructed over the years began to crumble. The judge's decision was a moment of catharsis. After weeks of emotional turmoil, the truth prevailed. The judge saw through Eric's manipulation, recognizing the depth of his deceit. I was awarded full control over my inheritance, the safety net I had fought so hard to preserve. Eric's defeat wasn't just a legal victory, it was a liberation. I was finally free from the clutches of his manipulation, free to rebuild my life on my terms, and free to honor the memory of my family without the stain of his greed tainting their legacy. But the scars of that battle remained, a reminder of the man I had once loved, the man who had betrayed my trust and attempted to tear down everything I held dear. The legal victory was bittersweet, a symbol of resilience in the face of betrayal and the strength to rise above the darkness he had brought into my life. With the courtroom battle behind me, I set my sights on rebuilding my life and securing a future for myself and my children. The inheritance that had once seemed like a burden now became a foundation upon which I could build something meaningful. I used the money wisely, investing in my dreams and aspirations, determined to turn my pain into purpose. The business I started flourished, bringing not only financial stability, but also a renewed sense of purpose and accomplishment. I poured my energy into creating something meaningful, something that honored the memory of my lost family while paving the way for a brighter future. With each success, I felt the weight of Eric's manipulation and betrayal lift, replaced by a sense of empowerment and triumph. Time passed, wounds healed, and life moved forward. And then, an unexpected twist entered the narrative. A year after our legal battle, Eric reached out to me, a gesture I never thought I'd see. He stood before me, humbled and changed, a shadow of the man who had once been consumed by his greed. He admitted his mistakes, acknowledging the pain he had caused and the depths he had sunk to. He spoke of his own journey towards self-awareness, of the reckoning he had faced in the aftermath of our legal battle. He was a changed man, seeking redemption not just in my eyes, but in his own. As I listened to his words, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger, hurt, and betrayal were still fresh in my memory. But there was also a glimmer of something else. A glimmer of the man he had once been, the man I had loved. I saw his genuine remorse, the weight of his past actions heavy on his shoulders. He surprised me by asking for a second chance, not as my husband, but as a co-worker. He wanted to start anew, to prove that he had truly changed. He sought a chance to be a part of the business I had built, to contribute in a meaningful way and perhaps find his own path to redemption. It was a decision that required careful consideration. The wounds he had inflicted were deep, and trust was not something that could be easily repaired. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw a flicker of the man I had once loved, the man who had been lost in the darkness of addiction and greed. In the end, I made a choice that surprised even myself. I offered him a chance, not just for redemption, but for growth. It wasn't a decision made lightly, and it wasn't a decision that erased the past, but it was a chance for him to prove that people could change, that redemption was possible, even in the face of the darkest mistakes. It was a warm summer evening when I found myself nervously fidgeting in my seat at a fancy restaurant. I was about to meet my fiancé's family for the first time, and I couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and anxiety. My fiancé, Alex, had assured me that his family was welcoming and kind, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. As I looked around the restaurant, I couldn't help but notice the opulence that surrounded me. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the tables were adorned with fine china and silverware. It was a stark contrast to my humble upbringing in a struggling, working-class family. I couldn't help but feel out of place. Finally, Alex's family arrived. They were dressed in elegant attire, and their demeanor exuded confidence and sophistication. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, greeted me with polite smiles, and his younger sister, Emily, seemed friendly enough. But it was Alex's older brother, Michael, who caught my attention. Michael was a manager at this very restaurant, a fact I was unaware of until that moment. His eyes seemed to narrow as he looked at me, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of judgment in his gaze. As we all sat down, I tried my best to engage in polite conversation, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being evaluated. As the evening progressed, my anxiety only intensified. The Andersons and I exchanged stories and pleasantries, but it was clear that we came from different worlds. I tried to be my best self, sharing anecdotes about my family and childhood, but I could see Michael's disapproval growing with each passing minute. When it came time to order, I carefully selected a moderately priced dish, not wanting to impose on Alex's family. However, when the waiter came to take our orders, Michael suddenly intervened. He insisted on ordering a selection of the most expensive dishes on the menu, as if trying to make a point. As the evening wore on, I could sense the tension in the air. Michael's disdain for me became increasingly evident, and I could see him whispering to his parents, occasionally casting disparaging glances in my direction. It was as if he had already made up his mind about me based on my humble background. Finally, when the desserts arrived, Michael leaned in and said something to his parents, his voice just loud enough for me to hear. "She doesn't belong here," he remarked, his tone dripping with condescension. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. It was an outright rejection. The tears flowed freely as I made my way out of the restaurant. I didn't want to create any more of a scene in front of Alex's family, but the pain I felt was unbearable. It was a long, lonely walk home, and with each step, I questioned whether my love for Alex was worth enduring such judgment and rejection. As I entered my small apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, still in shock from the events of the evening. My mind raced with a whirlwind of emotions: anger, hurt, and a profound sense of injustice. I had always known that Alex's family came from a different background, but I had hoped that love would bridge the gap. I couldn't help but replay Michael's words in my head: "She doesn't belong here." Those words echoed like a haunting refrain, a stark reminder of the barriers that stood between me and the life I had hoped to share with Alex. In the days that followed, I withdrew from Alex, unable to face the painful reality of his family's rejection. I began to question whether our love was strong enough to withstand the judgment and prejudice that seemed to be lurking just beneath the surface. Little did I know that there was more to this story than met the eye. The days following that ill-fated dinner were filled with inner turmoil. I couldn't shake off the feeling of rejection, and I wondered if Alex's family's perception of me would forever be tainted by that one evening. But little did I know that a revelation was in store. About a week after the restaurant incident, Alex came to me with a sullen expression. He took a deep breath and confessed that his brother, Michael, was the manager of that very restaurant. I was stunned. I couldn't believe that Michael had been in a position of power over me during that humiliating evening. Alex explained that Michael had never approved of our relationship, and he had used his position to orchestrate the embarrassing rejection at the restaurant. It was a shocking revelation, and I felt a mix of anger and sadness. How could someone be so vindictive, especially when it came to his own brother's happiness? Alex assured me that he had confronted Michael about his actions and that he was deeply sorry for what had happened. He explained that he had been torn between his love for me and his loyalty to his family, but he had finally chosen to stand by my side. As I listened to Alex's words, I realized that our love had triumphed over prejudice and betrayal. It was a testament to the strength of our bond. With newfound determination, we decided to confront his family and put an end to the toxicity that had plagued our relationship. This revelation marked a turning point in our journey, one where we would face challenges together, united against those who sought to tear us apart. It was a reminder that love could conquer even the deepest divides, and we were determined to prove it. Alex and I spent hours discussing how to address the situation with his family. We knew that it wouldn't be easy, but we were determined to confront the prejudice and division that had threatened to tear us apart. We decided that it was time to have an open and honest conversation with his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, about what had transpired at the restaurant. We invited them to our home, hoping that a more relaxed and familiar setting would encourage a candid dialogue. When they arrived, the tension was palpable, but we were resolute in our determination to make things right. As we all sat down, Alex began to speak, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He recounted the events of that evening at the restaurant, how I had been unfairly judged and rejected by Michael, his own brother. He emphasized that our love was genuine and deep, and he couldn't stand by and let prejudice divide our family. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson listened in silence, their expressions shifting from surprise to realization as they absorbed the gravity of the situation. Emily, Alex's younger sister, looked troubled by what she was hearing, clearly unaware of her brother's actions. Finally, Alex turned to his parents and asked a poignant question. Is our love not enough? Shouldn't the happiness of your own child be the most important thing? His words hung in the air, a plea for understanding and acceptance. After a long, tense pause, Mr. Anderson broke the silence. He admitted that he had been unaware of the extent of Michael's actions and that he had always wanted his children to be happy. Mrs. Anderson nodded in agreement, tears welling up in her eyes. It was clear that they were torn between their love for their sons and their desire to see them both happy. In that moment, I realized that love and understanding could indeed bridge even the deepest divides. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson apologized for what had happened at the restaurant, and they promised to address the issue with Michael. They expressed their support for Alex and me, acknowledging that our love was genuine and worthy of their acceptance. It was a turning point in our relationship, one that brought us closer to Alex's family and allowed us to heal from the wounds of prejudice. Michael's actions had caused pain and heartache, but they had also sparked a transformation in our understanding of love and acceptance. As we left that evening, hand in hand, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of hope for our future together. Our love had endured the ultimate test, and we had emerged stronger, more united than ever before. We knew that challenges lay ahead, but we were ready to face them together, armed with the unwavering belief that love could conquer all. In the aftermath of that emotional conversation with Alex's parents, our relationship began to heal and grow stronger. The revelation of Michael's actions had brought about a transformation in our understanding of love, family, and acceptance. It was a pivotal moment that had not only solidified our bond, but also fostered a sense of unity with Alex's family. Alex and I continued to nurture our love, knowing that we had overcome a significant hurdle. We were more determined than ever to build a life together, one that would be defined by love and mutual respect. As time went on, we saw changes within Alex's family as well. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, once torn between their sons, became increasingly supportive of our relationship. They recognized that love knows no boundaries and that happiness was what truly mattered. The relationship between Alex and Michael, however, remained strained. Michael had to come to terms with the consequences of his actions, and while he never fully apologized, there was a palpable shift in his attitude. He began to distance himself from our relationship, choosing not to interfere further. As the months passed, we decided to plan our wedding. It was a joyful occasion that brought both of our families together in a celebration of love and unity. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson's initial reservations had given way to genuine enthusiasm for our marriage. They were proud to welcome me into their family, recognizing that love had prevailed over prejudice. Emily, Alex's younger sister, played a pivotal role in bridging the gap between us and Michael. She had been unaware of the extent of her brother's actions and felt betrayed by his behavior. Over time, Emily made it clear to Michael that she would not tolerate any more interference in our relationship. Her support helped create a more harmonious dynamic within the family. Our wedding day was a testament to the power of love to overcome adversity. It was a day of joy, laughter, and tears of happiness. Alex and I stood before our families and friends, ready to embark on a new chapter of our lives together. As we exchanged our vows, we knew that our love was unbreakable, a force that had withstood the challenges of prejudice and judgment. In the years that followed, we faced the ups and downs of life as a team, growing closer with each passing day. The scars of that fateful evening at the restaurant had healed, leaving us with a deeper appreciation for the love and acceptance that we had found in each other. As the years rolled on, our love story took an unexpected turn, one that would test our resilience and the bonds we had built over the decades. After 30 years of marriage, Alex and I found ourselves facing a painful and heartbreaking reality. Alex, the man I had shared a lifetime with, made a decision that shattered our family. He chose to leave our marriage for another woman, a decision that left me devastated and bewildered. Our children, who had grown up in the warmth of our love and unity, were left grappling with the upheaval of their world. It was a difficult period, marked by heartache, tears, and countless sleepless nights. I struggled to come to terms with the end of a relationship that had defined most of my adult life. The pain was overwhelming, and I found myself navigating the unfamiliar terrain of single parenthood. Despite the turmoil, I drew strength from the love and support of our children, who had always been a source of joy and pride. They helped me find my footing in this new chapter of life, reminding me that there was still hope and happiness to be found. Our extended families, who had once come together to celebrate our love, now rallied around me in my time of need. They offered comfort and solace, helping me cope with the immense loss I was experiencing. As the years passed, I learned that life could take unexpected turns, and love could evolve in ways we never anticipated. While the pain of our separation was deep and lasting, it also opened up new opportunities for growth and self-discovery. While my journey had taken a different path than I had ever imagined, I continued to cherish the lessons I had learned from our love story, the power of resilience, the importance of family, and the belief that love, in its many forms, could sustain us through life's most challenging trials.